Yeah, I want to actually read some of these quotes just so that this was actually on your Twitter account. I want to read your tweet that really showcases the racism in Zionism, this idea that this is our land and it's based, I think any ethnic nationalism and any racism in general, actually, when you look at segregation, apartheid, when you look at any of these types of separations, it's because we can't mix with them is the ideology, right? We can't mix with them because if we mix with them, it's going to be an existential threat to our existence. That is usually the argument that is made, like blacks and whites can't live together because if they do, they'll kill each other. So that was the ethos under segregation. Same thing with apartheid in South Africa. We can't mix them. If they mix, it's going to be, hell's going to break loose. So, but these are some of the words, and a lot of people are saying it's Hamas, it's them. They're the ones who will not live with the Jews in Israel. They will massacre us. It'll be suicide. It'll be another Holocaust if we end the blockades, if we end the occupation, if we allow everybody to live on the land together equally. Then it will be the end of us, and not just the end of the Jewish state, the Zionist state that says the Jewish people are the premier group in this country. We don't, America's for Americans, be you black, white, brown, Asian, be you Muslim, Christian. Is it predominantly white, predominantly Christian? Yes, but we don't have anything in our Constitution that says anymore that this is a country that favors one group over another. In Israel, it is in their basic law that one group is favored over the other groups. That's in their laws, and they recently passed this. This isn't even an old law. This is a law that they affirmed again in 2018, and they continue to affirm laws like this. But these are some of the phrases that people have said. Daniel Hagari, Israeli Army Spock, says, "We are dropping hundreds of tons of bombs on Gaza. The focus is on destruction, not accuracy." So they're not trying to pinpoint Hamas and go after the bad guys. They're just trying to destroy the place. Here's another one, Ariel Kalner. She's an Israeli politician of Likud, which is Benjamin Netanyahu's political party. Now there's only one goal, Nakba, which Nakba to the Arab population means catastrophe. That's what that word means. And it back in 1948, they had a Nakba where 700,000 of them were pushed out of what is now Israel proper, and they were massacred and pushed out and put into refugee camps. And so this woman says, now there's only one goal, Nakba, a Nakba in Gaza that will dwarf the Nakba of 1948. Mind you, these are not old quotes. These are quotes from this current conflict. This one, Ezra Yakin, Israeli army veteran, says, wipe out their families, their mothers, and their children. These animals must not be allowed to live any longer. Tali Gottlieb, who's an Israeli politician, also of the Likud party. Jericho missile, that's like a nuke, right? Jericho missile, doomsday weapon, that's my opinion. Powerful rockets to be fired without borders, Gaza to be smashed and razed to the ground without mercy. President Herzog, the president of the country, says it's an entire nation who is responsible. This rhetoric about civilians not being involved is absolutely untrue, and we will fight until we break their backs. And Maya Golan, who she says she is racist. She literally comes out and says, yes, I am racist. I'm racist because that's self-preservation. She's literally said this. She's a young Israeli woman who is in a position of power, very controversial when she was made the Israeli Minister of Women's Affairs because she says I'm a racist, point blank. She says, I want to tell the world what they have long known about me in Israel. I don't care about Gaza. I literally don't care about Gaza. They can go swimming in the sea. So this is the rhetoric that is coming out of the Israeli political group. This is not just fringe people online. These are people in positions of power, and they're saying very genocidal rhetoric. If this was reversed and these were politicians coming from anywhere else in the world and saying this type of stuff about Jews, but then they say, well, Hamas says this about us, so it's okay for us to say this about Hamas because they say this about us. I mean, this is how do they get out of this? What do you think the solution is? This will be my last question for you. What would you do as president?
So Kim, when I found those quotes and I put them up, right? The reason I wanted to do that was to, again, education. I believe ultimately, I believe in working people do not want to live like this.
Right.
If you look at Malcolm X spoke a lot of ethnic nationalist rhetoric during his life, right? And then when he went to Mecca and he actually saw, wait a minute, these are all different people of all different backgrounds, and I've actually been manipulated by Elijah Muhammad, who was an ethnic nationalist. Sort of, he created a version of Zionism for blacks, right?
Hmm.
And after Malcolm came back from Mecca, he gave a very famous speech. He said, "I believe there will ultimately be a clash between the oppressed and those who do the oppressing, but it will not be based on the color of the skin." 2 weeks after that, he was executed. So they do not, though the swarm does, it gets back to the central thesis I have, does not want working people coming together to define what is in their class interests. That's what this is
Right.
about. As long as we are fighting with ethnic nationalism, it's fine. So the United States is in a very, very important, has a huge opportunity right now. And I think it's the opportunity for us to educate people on what is Zionism. So if I were president, I know the presidency is corrupt. I know the legislature is corrupt. I know the judiciary is corrupt. What would I do? I would do a video with you, just like we're doing right now, Ken, but we reach 8 billion people. The goal is one individual cannot change the world. We have to raise people's consciousness
Hmm.
to understand that ethnic nationalism, this entire thing, is not in your interest. The swarm is very clear: power, profit, control. How is it to your interest to be supporting Zionism in Israel? What has it actually done for you? Well, it prints more money. Zionists share their capital among themselves. How is it to your interest? And
Right.
this re-education, or this education, really needs to be done. And that's why I believe, in spite of all the horror going on, we have this opportunity to do that. Um, and that education needs to be done from a systems understanding. We have to understand that there's a set of people who have a collective interest in advancing power, profit, control. That's why I'm grateful you went through the swarm video and we started this discussion on that. It's a good place to end it too. So working people of the world, the 8 billion of us, need to ask ourselves, what interest do I have in following ethnic nationalism? What interest does a Hindu have in India supporting Zionism? What interest do you have? What interest does a poor working class Christian have in supporting Christian Zionism? How has that served you? What it has served you is, for the last, since 2008, we've had at least 2 to 3 quantitative easings where we've printed $33 trillion right now. And who did that money go to? It went to people like Elon Musk, who still controls Twitter, who still serves government, as I expose in our lawsuit. We don't have the First Amendment anymore. So we are constraining working people's freedoms. We are devaluing their labor. And ultimately, it's to cage people in the triangle of central bank currencies, carbon tax, and censorship. That's where this is
Yeah.
all headed. And us supporting Zionism, which is racism, which is against working people's interests, is what people need to educate. So it's really a psychological operation that was done since 1948, Kim. And I think what we need to do is to raise people's consciousness.
Yeah. And I agree that I think that the vast majority, I mean, you and I have both been over to Israel. Have you been into the West Bank? Have you seen the occupation and
No,
going
I didn't have
around?
a
Oh
chance to go
man,
there. Yeah.
it'll leave you speechless. I mean, just you can it's unreal that this is happening in real time in today's society, in a place that claims to be a Western democracy. It's unreal. But when I was there and I spoke to all these wonderful Palestinian people, there is no doubt. I agree with you 100%. There is no doubt that the average working Palestinian who's not in leadership, Hamas, they talk about this all the time and point it out in social media and on the mainstream media that, well, the Hamas guys, they're wealthy, they're off in Qatar doing what, they're not even in Gaza. So then it's like, well, then why are you bombing the place, right? I mean, if the elites are billionaires running around, so the swarm of Hamas, their political elites, and the Israeli elites that are sitting there saying this genocidal rhetoric, and the Hamas elites that are saying genocidal rhetoric, right? The vast majority of the people of Israel and the people of Palestine just want a better life. They just want to work and have a good life for their children, for themselves, have homes, have opportunities. That's all they want, and they could absolutely do it together. I have no doubt in me after meeting the Palestinian people, after being around in Israel and seeing the average Israelis, they could absolutely live together and have a prosperous, wonderful life, just like we've been able to do here in the United States. You and I, as people who are not white, we do believe that we can make it. We can work in this country, that we have opportunities. We don't have to be separated and segregated from one another. We don't need to live like that. And I believe that the swarm, like you're saying, the swarm of on all sides is just operating together for their own self-interest. You think Hamas wants to end this if these guys are making billions of dollars off of this conflict? You think these Israeli Likud party people want to stop this when it's self-preservation, they're making money and they're in the elite and they're the swarm? Nobody wants to end it, but the people do. And you're right, we have to rise up, we have to get the message out, and we have to say the people, this is for the people. This is what the people want. We want to end this division and this hatred and this rhetoric that's meant to divide us and keep us separated, just to keep them going, keep the swarm going. That's all we're doing. And you have really, really wonderfully pointed that out.